Okay, well, we are doing something really fun right now. This is my amazing award-winning author sister, and her name is Sarah Birdsall, and she's got great books. I will show you pictures and provide you links to all her books. Okay, show us what we're doing, Sarah Jane. Talkeetna has a lot of ghosts. Growing up as kids here, we heard all the stories, and so Sarah put together this book all about the ghosts of Talkeetna. And she's going to give us a ghost tour right now. So let's go. We're going to learn all about the ghosts of Talkeetna. Where are we starting?
We're going to start over at the Roadhouse on Main Street. The Roadhouse is one of our historic buildings. It was built in the 1920s, and it used to belong to a fellow named Frank Lee, who was a horse freighter. He would freight deer across the river. So there's a lot of history with this place, and a lot of generations of Talkeetnaites coming to here. But our story begins in New Year's Eve, 1990, and it was a blue moon New Year's Eve in 1990. And the people who tell those stories seem to think that was rather important, that it was because it was an odd event. You know, how it's only once every 19 years that a blue moon happens on New Year's Eve. And the people who came here was a young family. It was Lynn and Marty Turstage and their two children, Evan and Katie. And the Roadhouse was actually closed that winter because it was for sale, and they had made arrangements with the owners to come up and explore the place and spend the night here because they were thinking of buying it. Because the year before they had come up here and spent the night and really fell in love with the place, and then heard it was for sale and thought, okay, here's our chance. So they had spent the day kind of wandering around and checking things out, and in the evening they were in the living area of the Roadhouse, which would be this section over here. And they found an old Ricola jukebox, and they plugged it in and it lit up and it worked. So Marty put a nickel in there, and they picked a song. It was a waltz, and their kids started dancing around the room like this, and Lynn and Marty were standing by the jukebox watching their kids. And as they watched, these swirling, smoky, foggy wisps kind of rose up out of the floor and coalesced into 3 dancing couples that were dancing around. They were like waltzing around their children. And their children didn't see them at all, but they looked at each other and, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And they were both seeing the same thing. And Lynn said that if Marty wasn't seeing it as well, then she never would have believed it. And then almost as quickly as they appeared, they disappeared.
Wow.
And you would think after that, maybe they wouldn't buy the place, but they did, and they owned it for a while. And Lynn had another semi-similar experience when they were redoing the log wall by the old stairs. Someone had put paneling over the wall, and they tore the paneling off so you could see the original log work. And the logs on the inside were chinked with twisted burlap, where people would take burlap and twist it up and shove it in between the logs. And she was standing at the top of the stairs, thinking about all the time and labor and skill it took to create that beautiful log wall with the twisted burlap insulation. And then she saw the same smoky, wispy thing, and like this hand appeared twisting burlap.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, and then it faded away, and she was obviously pretty amazed by that. And then another time, Marty was down underneath the Roadhouse where the plumbing is. It was like a kind of a crawl space under there. And he had his friend Wes helping him. And Wes had to go back up through the trap door to get something that they needed. And as Marty was down there, he felt someone come up beside him, and a voice said, "Move over." And he said, "What?" He said, "Move over." And he looked, and there was no one there.
Oh, weird.
And Wes, in the meantime, had gotten lost in another part of the crawl space, and Marty heard him shortly thereafter yelling for him. So Marty doesn't know what the voice was, whatever it was wanted him to do, but it wanted him to move over for some reason. And that was about all that happened to them, except, the kids talked about, who are adults now, but they talked about how there's a long hallway that leads to bathrooms in the back, how they didn't like going down that hallway at night, and it always creeped them out, and Lynn said the same thing. And the current owner, Tricia Costello, she says she's been in this place all hours of the day and early morning, because he runs a bakery out of here, and never had any experiences, except for the time when she had on the wall a framed drawing, three-part drawing of one of our former famous mountain guides, Ray Genet, who died on Everest. So she had that. It's called The Ascension of Ray Genet. That was framed on the wall. And she said one day it just flew off the wall and crashed on the floor on the glass. But there's no reason for it to fly off the wall. So, she did say nothing happened except that one thing.
So is there any theories about who these wispy ghosts are? I mean, was there any trauma or anything that happened that might have kicked it off? Just
No, I think they
random.
were thinking it was more like, because it was New Year's Eve, and there were probably many New Year's Eve parties here back in the day.
Uh-huh. Wow.
And that it was, they didn't feel like they were angry ghosts or scary haunty ghosts. They were just
Partying.
They just came and were dancing to the music.
It was New Year's Eve.
Yes.
Wow, great stories. Very cool.
So this is another historic old building here in Talkeetna. And I always think of it as the beautiful greenhouse on Main Street. And for years, our mother loved this cabin.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah. It's built by, I forget the name of the guy who built it, but it was built for a fellow named Tom Weatherell, and it was his house. He was a gold miner, and later turned store clerk or something like that. This place has sat empty for decades, and for years, when we were growing up here, I heard stories about that. Sometimes you could see a figure up there in that lone window.
Oh, I remember hearing that.
Yeah. And I'd always, wanted to see it myself, but I finally ran into someone who heard I was writing this ghost book, and she said, "Oh, I saw the ghost in the Weatherell house." And what happened with her, it's really not a gigantic story, but it was a summer evening, and years ago, summer evenings here were a lot quieter than they are now. And she was walking her dogs down to the river, and she just glanced up and saw the shape of a figure in the window, and it moved. And the house was all boarded up, and a few years after that occurrence, it did have some work done on it, and it was opened up for a short time. And I knew the fellows who were doing the renovation, and they were all excited and said, "Sarah, you have to come look at this." And we went upstairs, and it was just so thick with cobwebs and dust, and nobody, at least no living person, had been up there for ages.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Okay.
the story with that one.
Yep, I remember hearing stuff about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And hopefully it's a happy ghost, because Tom Weatherell
Hopefully.
was apparently a very nice man.
All right, we're moving on to the next haunted location.
So this is the Harry Robb cabin built by David St. Lawrence, who who built a number of these old cabins around town. And Harry Robb was a riverboat captain who retired here in this cabin and spent the rest of his days in Talkeetna. Sometime in the 70s, he fell ill, and his friends came to check on him and took him into Anchorage, and he passed away, so he never returned to his home. And about 25 years later, a fellow named Marty Turstage, who we talked about in relation to the Roadhouse, and the head of the local historical society, because Harry Robb left this house to the historical society, they unlocked it for the first time since Harry Robb's death, and it was like 25 years later. And Marty says it was like a time capsule. But they opened the door, and Marty says he saw a figure walk quickly across the floor as they swung open the door. And that was it. It was just a glimpse of something, someone. But
Wow.
like Harry's pants were like laid out across his chair, and it was just as he had left it when he fell ill and went into the hospital in Anchorage. And the whole time he was renovating this place to get it ready for, it's a museum exhibit now. Um, Marty said he never felt like he was alone over here. But it wasn't a bad feeling. It was a good feeling, a comforting feeling. Harry Robb was one of our old timers, and was, as far as everything I've heard, he was very well liked. So,
R.I.P. Harry Robb. Like your cabin.
so this is the Talkeetna Inn, formerly the Talkeetna Motel, with the Teepee Lounge, and the times that I was doing ghost tours, when I would take people here, we wouldn't get any closer than this. And that's out of reverence to the former owner, Pam, who told me her ghost stories from this place. Because she kind of felt like the presence of the former owner, Alice Powell, otherwise known as Evil Alice,
Evil Alice,
was
yeah.
still here. And when she called me to tell me the stories, she said, I just don't know if I should be telling you this. I don't want to get her upset. So she took it very seriously, the presence that she felt in this place. And she and her partner, Al, owned it for decades and only recently sold it. But Pam said that as soon as she started working here, she felt like something was pushing her to just work and work and work and work. And, you know, in hindsight, she feels that it was the spirit of Alice. But she had a couple of scary times in here, scary incidents. And she's not sure if they were Alice or not. But one time she was closing up the bar late at night. And this end of town, it's very noisy now, but it used to be super, super quiet. Oops.
Oh, these people that want to drive in the streets.
Yeah. So years ago, it used to be really quiet, this end of town, especially like on a dark fall night, which was one of the nights Pam told me about. She had closed up the bar and she was adding up her figures and all that. And she heard in that upper unit 3 distinct footsteps. And the place was shut up completely up there. The door had a board across it, nailed shut. And she went outside and looked around the back and double checked to make sure that door still had the boards across it, and it did. And there was no way anybody could have gotten up there without her seeing. And she just left really quickly. She can't even remember if she properly locked everything up, but she just got such a feeling of like something's up there that she hurried and left. Came back the next day and went upstairs, to see if something fell off a shelf or something, and nothing did.
Ugh.
And another night, she was there working. After she was done in the bar, she went to prep in the kitchen area, just in there by herself, and all of a sudden she saw where it was lit where she was, but the rest of the place was dark because they were doing some renovations and one of the lights was out. She saw a floating light, like it was like a spear, like about 2 feet or so, maybe 3 feet, come just floating through the space and into the dining area, and then it just kind of hovered.
Ew.
Yeah, she said it was not totally solid, but it was not opaque either, and it was kind of fuzzy around the edges. And she just, felt like there was a presence there.
Wow.
And she had thought her mother had passed recently, and she thought maybe it was her mother, but then she thought no, it was probably Alice,
Wow.
who Alice Powell built this place in the 70s and apparently really loved it. And she was called Evil Alice. I guess she got that nickname when she used to work at a doctor's office in Anchorage, where a lot of ladies of the night would go to get medical help. And apparently she reported them to the police or gave their names to the police, told them who the ladies of the night were. So that's where she got her nickname, Evil Alice.
Oh, that's interesting. I never knew that.
According to Pam, Evil Alice still stays there. But there's also been stories over the years of other ghosts being here. Most notably, a local river guide who drowned in the river in a freak accident. One late night, my friend Bill was down here with his buddies. This was like last stop of the night kind of place. And they went inside the lounge, and Billy saw this fellow sitting kitty corner across from him at the bar who was drinking, looked like whiskey in a short glass, toasting him. And he said to his friend, he said, "Hey, do you see that guy over there toasting us?" And his friend said, "Who? What?" His friend didn't see anybody in that corner.
Uh-huh.
And the very next day, and this is years before I decided to write a book about ghosts of Talkeetna, Bill said to me, he just said, "Yeah, there was this guy in the teepee last night, and he was toasting us, and Ross didn't see him." And he described in detail the person. And from what I could tell, he was totally describing this local river guide who drowned a couple of years before.
Wow.
And who he had never met.
Oh, wow.
And this river guide used to play drums with our brothers in local bands.
Oh, wow.
Our brothers, and
Well, it would make sense that he'd haunt a bar then.
he also lived near it. And I asked one of my brothers, well, what did he drink? And he said, "Oh, that's easy. It was always the same thing, whiskey in a short glass."
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
you can't make that stuff up.
No.
And years later, before Pam and her partner sold this place, Bill went in there and talked to them one night and just said, "I really thought I saw this person in here one night." And she said, "Oh, yeah, other people have said they've seen him too."
Oh, wow.
And she said, "Oh, he always would sit right over there." And that was where Bill had seen him.
Wow.
Same part
Yeah.
of the bar.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Another scary detail about this place is it's the first place I ever worked a real job. I should say the first and only place I've ever worked a real regular day job. When I was 15 years old, I waited tables here for 3 weeks.
Oh, well, it was also
3
where
weeks.
I spent my 21st birthday. Well, I didn't spend the whole time there. I went in there and had a shot of tequila to celebrate turning 21.
There you go. And it was probably the last stop of the night.
Actually, it was the only one.
Oh, wow. What do you know?
That was enough for me, even back then. Okay, so over here is probably one of Talkeetna's most haunted buildings. Really, probably 90% of people who live here have some kind of an experience that's unexplainable. I lived in the house for a time in the 1970s with a friend of our family's named Nita, and she lived here with her 2 daughters. And my bed was on up at the top of the staircase, and I would hear often what sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs. And I remember rolling over in my cot, and there would be nothing there. And that happened quite a lot. And then I've since learned that other people hearing footsteps on the stairs in this place was one of the things that people would always hear. Years later, well, probably only like a year later, my friend Penny was living here. And she said one night she and Nita's 2 daughters were sitting on the couch, and she and the older daughter were reading to the younger daughter. And she just had this feeling of something, and she just said out of the blue, "He's here." And then the door swung open on its own.
Whoa.
And then they felt like this cold something, cold air just kind of move past them and move up the stairs, and then they heard some footsteps up there, like toward the top of the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
And she said they didn't quite know what exactly to do because it happened and then it was over. And they were years after Penny's experience. A woman named Vicky was living here, and one night she and her cousin were sitting in the living area on the couch, and so they were like here, and the stairs were here, and there was a window here that faced out toward the street. And all of a sudden they saw it was dark outside, and they saw in the reflection, in the window, they saw a reflection of a man in jeans and some kind of a plaid shirt walking up the stairs.
Wow.
And a minute later, her dog just got all and went racing up the stairs.
Wow.
But there was nothing there. And it was another one of those things where they were like, well, what are we supposed to do now? Because they both saw it.
Wow.
And Vicky lived here for quite a few years, and she felt that there was more than one ghost in there. She thought, like other people had, that perhaps it was a ghost of a climber, or there were several ghosts of climbers, mountain climbers. Oftentimes the shades would snap up on the upper window, which on a clear day you can see the mountain. And mountain climbers around here, one of the things they always do is they're always checking to see if the mountain's out.
Uh-huh.
One night she was sleeping upstairs in that room, and she woke up, and the shade was up, and she looked out the window, and she said she saw one of the most beautiful sights she had ever seen, and the mountain was just drenched in golden moonlight. And she felt that the ghosts woke her up so she could see that.
Wow, that's cool.
So other things that she reported that other people mentioned were the door opening on its own. And she said the ghosts were always playing tricks, but she never felt afraid. She felt like they were friendly ghosts.
Well, that's good.
So that is good.
Yeah.
Another owner who lived here in more modern times, she had heard all the stories before she bought it, and she was like, whatever. She was in her kitchen cooking some pancakes, in the kitchen cooking pancakes. Her husband was talking to her, and all of a sudden her husband said, "How did you do that?" Because apparently, without her doing anything, a pancake came up out of the frying pan and onto the floor.
Whoa.
She didn't do it. He was watching.
Huh.
So it was after that she got to thinking, well, maybe there's something to all those ghost stories. And her son and one of his friends had an experience where there was this cupboard with glass and stuff in it, and just randomly one day some glasses came flying out.
Wow.
And there was no earthquake, there were no trucks going by on the road. There's no explanation. One of the prior owners had a plumber coming in here, He was down in the very creepy basement working on some plumbing, and he had to go up top to get some solder to solder some pipes together. And he came back down, and the pipes were soldered together.
Oh, well, that's
And
convenient.
and he came running up and told the owner, he says, "Ma'am, you have a ghost in this house, and I am not coming back." And she had to hire someone else to finish the job.
Well, she should have hired the ghost to finish
She
the
should-
job.
Yeah, sounds like he knew what he was doing.
It's like, you don't need to come back, buddy. Okay, tell us.
This is the Three German Bachelors cabin. It's another historic old cabin. The building's owned by the Talkeetna Historical Society, and it is currently home to Aurora Dora Photography. She's a Northern Lights photographer. But years ago, when we were kids, this place was pretty dark looking and kind of creepy. And in the 1960s, the late 1960s, there was a fellow whose nickname was 8-Ball who lived around here. And one night, after a night of debauchery in the Fairview,
Of course.
the next morning, his friend Revis came over here and walked in and saw 8-Ball in his cot still sleeping, which made sense given the night of debauchery in the Fairview. And so Revis started making coffee and then suddenly realized that his friend was not asleep, his friend was dead. And there was an investigation of sorts into why 8-Ball died. He wasn't that old of a fellow. But back then Talkeetna was still pretty cut off besides the railroad and the rivers for access, and if you had a plane to fly in. But at least one person I talked to remembers that there were some troopers involved trying to investigate, and it was never really determined what happened to him. So over the years, various local people lived here, and in the 1970s, our brother Jonathan was one of them. He lived here with his friends, Skip and Mark.
I remember that.
And one night, John woke up and Skip was gone in Anchorage. But he looked over on Skip's bed and there was someone sitting there. And he said, "Oh, hi, Skip," and went back to sleep. But then he woke up in the morning and saw no one had slept in Skip's bed. And he asked Mark, he said, "Well, where's Skip?" And he said, "He's still in Anchorage." He said, "Well, I saw him last night." And he said, "No, you didn't. He wasn't here." So that was one thing. And then things would happen like the radio going off and on, and the lights going off and on, which, that could all be explained by bad electricity.
Yeah.
But at one point when John, first of all, he always felt a little unsettled in here. And he always looked forward to the weekend when he would spend Friday night with another of his friends, and then he'd go home to where we lived up the tracks on Saturday. He was doing his homework, and there was a single bare bulb with one of those pull switches. And it went out, so he got up and turned it back on. And it went out, he got up and turned it back on. And then he just watched it for a while, and he saw the string move.
Oh, ow.
Yeah,
Ooh.
like as if someone was pulling it and turning the light off. And he got out of here. He said he left.
I don't blame him.
So our friend Mark, meantime, he continued to live here for like about 5 more years, and he was very bothered by something in this place. And he actually had a seance here that my friend Jerry attended. And Jerry doesn't believe that the seance person was correct. The seance person said, "There's 3 bodies buried under the cabin, but just recently had the foundation redone and there were no bodies under here." So he felt that the seance was a sham thing, but I think the point was Mark was so bothered by whatever he felt sometimes in this cabin, that he felt the need to do that.
Huh.
And then something did happen in this cabin that apparently scared Mark so bad that he moved away, not just from this cabin, but he moved away from Alaska. And he told his friends that he knew something about 8-Ball and he was leaving and he was never going to come back, and he didn't. His family actually hired a private detective to try to find him at one point, and he was listed as a missing person.
Wow.
In 2012, we did learn that he died in a cabin fire somewhere like in New Mexico or Nevada or something, which was, a sad end for him. His friends, and our brother John especially, have always wondered what was it that scared him so much.
Wow.
That he left, and his life seemed to fall apart after that.
Tomb of the unknown hippie and some very well known and loved. I never noticed that before.
Okay, so over here is the historic Fairview Inn, built in 1927. A lot of stuff goes down in the Fairview in years past and currently. When I was working on the book, I talked to different people who worked at the Fairview over different times, different decades. I talked to people who worked there in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s. And they all had some things in common, which is the bartenders would talk about when they're closing up at night, seeing a figure at the bar. And then turning around, looking away, and then looking back and the figure being gone. Or seeing someone go into the back room when no one's there. And also strange noises coming from the rooms upstairs from people who have stayed in the Fairview. And I think you can actually rent the rooms up there now again. I would not stay here. You could not pay me to stay here. But very similar stories of sounds like furniture moving around, or even someone said it sounded like someone was playing basketball in one of the other rooms. And this is when these were employees who were just spending the night in the room because they worked really late, and maybe there was a snowstorm and they were kind of stuck in town, and no one else would be here. And they would hear these noises. And then my friend Kim, one of the times that she was staying here, again, she was the last person in here, closed up the bar. Weather was awful. It was winter. She decided to go spend the night in one of the rooms, which the manager let them do. And she heard footsteps in the hall to start with, woke her up, and she's like, oh, did someone come in? And then the next time she woke up, something was touching the bottom of the bed.
Oh,
She felt it, like
don't like that.
something touching the bottom of the bed, and she got up and got out of there.
That would get me moving too. Yeah. Don't like that at all. I remember staying there one night when I was a kid, and it was probably one of those instances where I think Steve and John were maybe playing here or something, and we weren't going to make it back up the tracks or something. And I remember it being really creepy up there. I mean, it's a very, very old. I mean, the place is, well, it's 100 years old now. You can see on the sign there. And boy, yeah, all the things that if these walls could talk.
Actually, it was built in 1923 by a fellow named Ben Newman. I said 1927, but it was 23.
Right, yeah, because
Yeah.
they got their 100-year sign there.
I forgot about that.
Yep, creepy place. Lots of drunk people. God only knows what's happened there over the years.
Well, I've always liked to imagine if the walls of the Fairview could talk.
Yep.
There are some stories to
Oh, yeah. Okay, hold up your book again so we can see this again. And there's a lot more stories in there, right?
tell. Oh, yeah.
So if you want to get all the stories and in their completeness, get this book. I'll provide a link. Right on. Thank you so much, Sarah Jane. And I'm also going to show you all her other books so that you can get those too, because they're great. All All right, this has been Ghosts of Talkeetna Tour with author Sarah Birdsall.